Introduction to Environmental Health Sciences. And today we're going to be talking about the composting of solid waste. Yeah, let's get started. So our purpose and objectives today are pretty simple, and there are three. First, we're going to define compost, explain what it is and how the composting process works. Then we're going to talk about the role that compost plays in New York City as far as the makeup of our solid waste and where some of our compost goes. Then we're going to look at some data to visualize what composting looks like in New York City today. This is just a quick overview of where we're headed. Right now we're at slide 3, table of contents, and you can see where we're going to be going from here. We're going to define composting, then talk about the process a little bit, talk about compost and the different levels of composting that go on in New York City, as well as look at some maps. Okay, so let's get into it here. To learn what composting is, first you need to understand, well, what is compost? And compost, as you can see, is decomposed organic material. Now, to gardeners, this stuff could be called black gold because there's many benefits to using compost in the garden. So compost is comprised of organic materials. So basically stuff from nature. It could include leaves, shredded twigs, kitchen scraps, anything plant-based really. And adding compost to clay-based soils will actually make them easier to work with and plant. Whereas if you add it to sandy soils, compost will make that sand more able to retain water. So depending on what kind of soil you're gardening with, compost can help make that soil easier to work with, and it can also help improve the growth of plants and the health of those plants as well. Because of all of the nutrients that exist in compost, it's really great food for any growing material. And some of the benefits of composting, as you can see, it helps recycle some of our food waste and yard waste, and that prevents additional waste from being filtered into landfills. As I mentioned briefly earlier, that breakdown of all of those organic materials enriches the soil and puts nutrients back into soils. And this is also a great way to save money. If you're a gardener, you know that mulch can be very expensive, and making your own compost is not only a great way to really have a better sense of what you're using and what kind of waste you're producing, but you can also save a bunch on peat moss and mulches. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the process of composting and how does it actually take place here. So basically, composting involves 4 main ingredients, and that's organic matter, which would be the green and brown materials you see represented by the circles. You also need moisture, you need oxygen, and you need microbes. So composting is also called controlled decomposition. So this means that microbes, you can see on the bottom left there, these little microorganisms, a variety of bacteria, microanimals, they actually break down the organic material, and then the magic ingredient, of course, would be time. So over time, the combination of organic materials with water, air, microbes, and moisture, as we mentioned before, produces this beautiful, dark, rich, brown soil that's very nutrient rich. You'll also see in the top right of the equation that some people will add red earthworms. This is sometimes referred to as vermiculture. These worms will break down the compost and they produce really high quality poop essentially, which is referred to as castings, and this can speed up the process of breaking down the compost. Now, you'll notice on the top left of the equation that I have separated the materials, the organic materials, into 2 categories. Now, brown and green materials are 2 different kinds of compost, and both are needed when you're starting off a compost bed to really get the proper combination of nutrients and start off the chemical process of the compost decomposition. So examples of green waste for compost would be like grass clippings, food scraps, manure, basically anything that's rich in nitrogen. whereas your brown materials would include things like dry leaves, wood chips, branches, other wood-based detritus, and these contain a lot of carbon, but not as much nitrogen. So the combination of the nitrogen and carbon create the perfect environment for the compost to start breaking down. To help us see where compost really fits in the bigger picture of New York City's garbage. So the left pie chart here, you can see that about a quarter of the trash that New York City makes is in kind of a miscellaneous category. That could be debris from construction sites or demolition projects, for example. Then another 10%, which is represented by that little orange sliver, would be other recyclable materials, for example, e-waste, clothing that people are disposing of, plastic shopping bags, and so forth. Then about a full third of New York City's waste can be fit into the curbside recyclable category. So those of us that live here are familiar. We sort our plastics, glass, metals, cardboards, cartons, etc., and we rinse those items and sort them with our trash, bring them out weekly, and those are brought to recycling centers. And then the last section here, 31%, so almost a full third of New York City's waste is actually organics, which are suitable for composting. So that's a big percentage of our waste. But then you'll see on the right side that only a tiny sliver, so small you can barely even see, only 0.2% of New York City's trash is actually composted. And then a much greater percent, about 82%, goes to landfills, whereas about 17% or so is used for waste-to-energy treatments to create electricity. So even though you can see a large chunk of New York City's waste is compostable, only a very small percentage of it gets composted in the end. So now we're just going to talk briefly about the three kind of tiers of composting, because at different scales the operations can look a little bit different. So on the left here rather, you have some smaller scale operations. This is composting that people do in their homes or in their yards or in community gardens where neighborhoods will get together. There's also a master composter certification that you can apply for to become certified as a basically expert in composting and help others set up small composting sites. And on the medium scale, you have things like NYC Compost Project, which are neighborhood level collection efforts, urban farming, which you can see in the photograph there. This is some people are saying this is going to be the future of urban agriculture as we have less and less arable land. We'll be doing things inside. And then on the right, these are our big, large-scale industrial scale efforts. So on the bottom, you can see an image. Those are the New York City curbside collection bins. We just got these in my neighborhood in Ridgewood. So these are the citywide organics collection bin efforts. And these will go out to all neighborhoods by the end of, I believe it's 2018. So if you don't have these in your neighborhood yet, you will soon. Our last data here, I just wanted to bring to light some maps that show what composting is looking like right now in New York City. On the left, this map highlights some of the New York City Compost Project sites. This data is from 2014, I believe. You can see that Brooklyn has the greatest number of sites, followed by the Bronx, Manhattan, or followed by Queens, rather, and then Manhattan has the third greatest number. The Bronx has 37 sites, and Staten Island has only 20. So again, these are neighborhood collection sites where people will bring their compost to a donation center. And then on the right side, you can see this is the map of the curbside organics collection. So these are those brown bins from the previous slide. And as I mentioned before, you can pause the video and see if your neighborhood will be getting these soon. But these are coming everywhere by the end of next year. So that's it. This was a brief presentation about compost. We learned that compost is a combination of organic products that enrich garden soils, help recycling efforts, that the most important ingredient in making compost is time, but you also need brown and green waste, air, moisture, and microbes. And then we took a look at some of the composting efforts that are going on in New York today. Thank you for watching.